Welcome to Satsang.
Could you please talk about spiritual traps today?
The main spiritual trap, or the thing that limits people the most in raising their consciousness once they've got into spirituality, is the collecting of knowledge. You see, we all went to school and we got taught that if we could collect knowledge and repeat answers related to that knowledge, that we could pass exams and go forward. Unfortunately, in higher consciousness and in spirituality, enlightenment, that's just not true. The collection of knowledge makes you knowledgeable, but it doesn't raise your consciousness levels at all. And so most people who get into spirituality, including myself when I first started, collected knowledge. They go and listen to teachers, they collect videos and tapes or whatever else is happening, podcasts, and they collect all this spiritual knowledge and they become very, very knowledgeable about the subject of higher consciousness and enlightenment. But it's all borrowed knowledge. It's all been given to them externally. And if collecting knowledge and being knowledgeable raised people's consciousness levels and woke them up, then the professors at university would all have higher consciousness and be awake. It's just not so. And so I think the main trap that we fall into as seekers would be that collection of knowledge, thinking that somehow that is going to raise our consciousness levels and wake us up. And really, the only thing that's going to make a difference in your consciousness levels is to practice something a little different to what you've been doing. And that's not popular. What's popular is collecting knowledge. And so when we look at traps, that's one of the beauties that people get caught in. Another one is what I call spiritual bypassing, and that is basically going to higher consciousness or going to beingness or going to that space of expanded mind to avoid discomfort, to avoid the problems of the world, a form of escapism. And that doesn't, well, it works. You can actually go to a more spacious space, find the emptiness, find the silence, find the stillness, and escape the world to some degree. But as long as you're escaping something, you actually aren't in acceptance of it. And the key to staying awake is unconditional surrender, which demands acceptance of what is. And so when people get to a reasonably high level in consciousness, they can turn awareness to itself to some degree and find that space of self. But it's a trap also if they're using it to escape feeling something in the material world. That's what I call spiritual bypassing. And it's a trap also. And it's a pretty common trap for people who have done a lot of work on themselves and have found the space, and they think, oh, I can just go to the space now. Well, yeah, you can, but you're not going to be able to stay there because you haven't surrendered unconditionally. You haven't made everything okay yet. You're still somewhere in resistance to life. So this is a very common trap also. And what happens with people who can find the space through self-inquiry, and some of them can even sit in satsang for a period of time, but then lose it again when they come back to ego-based reality because they haven't surrendered enough. I call that half-baked enlightenment, where they can hold a satsang, maybe, but then they go back to ego-based contractions and living as an ego. That's not full enlightenment, that's half-baked. And so spiritual bypassing can create that. Using self-inquiry can create that problem. And it's a trap. It's definitely a trap. I remember in 21 years ago, John de Ruyter explained it to me, explained what he called the Advaita sickness. And he called it half-baked enlightenment, because people could actually find the space through self-inquiry, hold satsang, and then get upset with their girlfriend or their boyfriend the next after satsang and lose it altogether and come back to ego-based reality, because they hadn't really surrendered everything. They were just using beingness as an escape methodology. And so they're the two main traps that I know about: the collection of knowledge instead of practicing, the collection of insights instead of practicing, and being able to turn awareness on itself and using that to escape discomfort or pain, not surrendering completely in the material world. A lot of people nowadays get into taking drugs to get insights. They take ayahuasca or ecstasy or some other drug that'll give them insights, and they think that somehow that'll raise their consciousness levels. Well, they're absolutely kidding themselves as well. An insight of any kind, whether it's come through meditation, self-inquiry or drugs, is only an invitation to do the work. It's not the answer. And the work is simple. You practice openness, you practice meditation, you remove the obstacles that are in the way of higher consciousness, and you self-inquire. The collection of knowledge, all it does is maybe fire up your thirst, that's all. And spiritual bypassing, by using Advaita Vedanta's method of self-inquiry, well, you go from heaven to hell, to hell to heaven, to heaven to hell, because you haven't fully woken yet, you're half-baked. It's a shame, but a lot of people get to that point, which is a very high point, and fail themselves badly because they don't keep surrendering. They just use the space and they use self-inquiry to escape. So, are there any questions, any statements, any challenges to this teaching today?
The first question is unconditional surrender the ultimate answer to spiritual traps?
Sure. That wasn't very hard, was it?
You say that the collection of knowledge is a trap. What is the best way to make use of the time spent in satsang and listening to teachers?
Right, so anyone who's awake, because satsang can be held by people who aren't awake, so you've got to be a bit careful of that. Anyone who's awake holding satsang has a Buddha field or an energy field around them that if you tune into, you can start to disappear as an I and find yourself as expanded reality beingness. And so the correct use of satsang is to tune in. You can listen to what's being said, that's not a problem, but it's more important to tune in and feel that energy field and allow yourself to surrender to it. You're not surrendering to another human being, you're surrendering to yourself, because you are that. You always have been that. And what's surrendering to it is not you, because you are not the I.
The next question is, I have met a spiritual teacher giving satsang when, from my understanding, they're not fully awake. What would make someone believe that they are awake, and how to avoid that trap?
I'm not sure. I have met spiritual teacher giving satsang when my understanding... I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. It doesn't seem to be well written. I have met spiritual teacher giving satsang when, from my understanding, they are not fully awake. What would make someone believe that they are awake and how to avoid that? Well, very simple. Papaji used to tell everyone they're awake. There's spiritual teachers out there, there's teachers who have been out there who are now deceased who have told people they're awake when they're not. You see, in the moment, if your awareness is on awareness, you're awake. But for that to be ongoing is a whole different story. And so you can sit next to someone who's awake and their presence can blow your mind away and you can find yourself as presence itself. And then they move away and you go back to ego-based reality. That's a satori. It's an awakening, but it's not awake. It's not enlightenment. But unfortunately, there were teachers out there telling people they're awake. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding out there because here is someone who's truly awake telling people they're awake and people get confused by it. If a spiritual teacher says you're awake in the moment. That has nothing to do with before or later. It's in that moment. And so Papaji was probably telling the truth in the moment, but it was misleading because enlightenment means awake every moment, 24 hours a day. Awareness, aware of itself. Consciousness, aware of itself. Beingness, aware of itself. 24 hours a day. And so people have gained false beliefs and understandings that they're awake because they've been with people who have been awake, who've told them they're awake. And they haven't really examined thoroughly what true enlightenment is. It's not a flip-flop affair. You're either awake or you're not awake. If you're fully awake, you're awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And your presence is there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because you're living as presence.
I have heard of paid courses you do to receive a certificate of enlightenment. Can you buy enlightenment?
I'm sure you can. I'm sure there'd be plenty of people out there selling certificates for enlightenment because there's lots of suckers out there. They say there's one born every minute. If you wake up and you stay awake, no, you don't need a certificate. You don't need anyone to tell you you're awake. You don't need some teacher telling you you're awake. If you're awake, you're awake. And there is nothing like it. Ego-based reality is so different to being awake. It is profoundly obvious if you're awake to you. You definitely don't need someone patting you on the back and saying, well done, you've made it. Because there's nobody there to even want that.
Kalimba would like to ask a question.
Hello, Kalimba. You're muted. That's better. Can I hear you?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kalimba. That's great.
Wow. Hard luck. Look, I wanted to ask a question about this. Like, I've had a few Satoris, a couple of them recently at the end of one of your satsangs when I'm just sitting there spaced out. But if Satori is like a mini enlightenment, when I'm in a Satori, it's like I don't have the energy to do anything. I just want to sit there and bless. Yeah. So how do you do that if you're in that space 24/7?
So after awakening in 1989, was it 89? 1999, I sat still for 6 months, 18 hours a day, just staring at space, Kalimba.
Yeah, that resonates.
And Isaac Shapiro came to town and said, hey, you got to come out. You got to come out and be in the world. And so I moved further out into the world, not because I really wanted to, because I was quite happy to sit and stare into space because I was blissed out. But I was also reminded that Osho Rajneesh said, if you do wake up, don't hide your light. Go out into the marketplace and shine it so others can see. And so since then, I've been in the marketplace, shining my light, doing satsangs like this, even online, but the pull-in is strong, I would prefer, if I had a choice, just to sit in my room blissed out.
Yeah, that resonates.
You get what's called, well, it's profound contentment for no reason, which means you're not very motivated by anything. The thing that motivates me is love. And I love you. And I'm here for you. And I'm here for those who want to find truth as themselves. But that's a love affair with truth from my mind. That's the only motivator. I don't have any others. That's it.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Vishrant.
Thank you, Kalimba.
How do I know that I've found a spiritual teacher who is genuine and not trying to fool me?
Yeah, you have to watch your teacher very closely and see if they're walking their talk. And if they hide away and you can only see them on a stage, well, it's going to be very difficult to do that. One of the things that occurred for me after awakening and people started coming and wanting to sit with me was I allowed them in my life. I allowed some of them to live in the same house with me, 3 actually. And I wanted them to see that what had happened here was real so they could trust it. Because a student or a disciple has to trust the awakened one. Because the awakened one is going to take them into the unknown. And if the awakened one can't be trusted, they won't go into the unknown. And so I allowed people to be very close to me and have done for the last 21 years so they could see what is here. They could see that the talk is being walked. Because it's only in that trust, that unconditional trust, that unconditional surrender arises and awakening can occur.
Victoria likes to say, Vishrant, I cannot ask questions as I'm at work, but just wanted to say that these satsangs are a lifeline, the best nourishment in a day. Thank you.
That's Premal. That's your sannyas name. Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. This is just an extension of Osho's work. He was my spiritual father and master.
The next question is, how did you avoid falling into the trap of developing a spiritual ego when you started raising your consciousness levels?
I didn't stop from falling into trap. Of course I developed a spiritual ego. I was wearing red and a mala, and I had pictures of Osho on every wall in my offices, and I had a huge spiritual ego. But you know, there's this song. It's I walk into the holy fire, and after meeting Osho, I walked into this holy fire, and everything got burnt. And what arose from that was a phoenix, but not from anything from the past. It was all new. And the phoenix had no real ego, so there was just humility. But not false humility that the ego can put on. The humility that comes from there being a lack of I, a lack of the identified one. Everybody develops a spiritual ego. Everybody. Everybody competes because we've all been programmed to. Even the monks, you know, they'll think, I'm a better meditator, or I'm more humble, or I'm more this or more that. It's like the ego, by its very nature, wants to be special in some way. The only way to diminish the ego really is to wake up. But if you want to get rid of a fair bit of it, move into selfless service, move into the way of the heart, because there's no room for you as an I in that, because it's service, it's Siva. And in Siva, we lose the I and we become humble. It's very beautiful. The spiritual ego. The spiritual ego is tricky. It's probably the dirtiest ego on the planet, really. It's the holier than thou ego. I'm better than you ego spiritually. It's craziness, really. It's like, wow, we are all one. How can anyone be better than anyone else? We are all one.
I found I can be quite competitive, and it has served me in the material world. Can a competitive spirit be used for high consciousness, or will it just strengthen the spiritual ego?
Yeah. Yeah, I went to a school where I was taught how to be competitive. We had to win at pretty much any cost. And then we competed against each other to get better marks in subjects, in sport. We competed. And so by the time I left school, I was just programmed to win, programmed to be competitive and win. And that's such a shame, really, because there's no heart in that. And it wasn't until I was, I think, 31, I was 32, that I realized that wasn't a way to live. Winning at the cost of other people is horrible. It's against the heart. And so I started to find my heart when I was 33, 34, and I realized, man, if I'm going to win, everyone has to win, or I'm not playing. Because the way of the heart, you love everybody and you love everything, and you want to help everyone and everything. You don't want to compete. Some people say, oh, well, compete with yourself. Become a better person today than you were tomorrow. Drop all competition. All competition makes the mind restless. Don't compete. Just do your best at whatever you do. Don't compete. Because if you win, someone loses. That's not beautiful. It's best if everybody wins. We're competing against ourselves anyway. Because everyone is one. We are all one. We are not two. There's only one being here.
Do you see the ego as the enemy for the seeker?
I've heard it said. I remember Robert Adams used to call the ego the enemy from time to time. I've seen it that way sometimes, but it's not a good way to see the ego. And the reason why is very simple. For the ego to really rest, it needs to be comfortable with itself. It needs to be okay with itself. It needs to be able to hold itself in tender okayness. Now, when the ego sees itself as an ego, as the enemy, it's just gone to war with itself, so it can't rest. It can't really rest. The ego needs to be okay with itself. It needs to accept itself thoroughly, and then it can rest. As long as it's in non-acceptance of any part of itself, any part of the mind, any part of the body, there isn't going to be rest. And so the foundation for higher consciousness is self-acceptance. And in self-acceptance, the ego can rest. And that's quite beautiful. The ego is not the enemy. The ego has some problems. It has obstacles that are in the way, but they can all be removed. The ego needs to be befriended. From the perspective of the ego, you need to be your own best friend, and you need to take care of you. That's best.
How do you not develop a spiritual ego?
Not possible. You will develop a spiritual ego if you get into spirituality. It's the nature of the ego to do so. The ego loves to be special, and if it gets into spirituality, it wants to be special at spirituality. It's just its nature to do so. But if you practice meditation, you practice self-inquiry, you practice open, that's a beauty, because in openness the ego disappears and the heart appears. If you practice these things, the ego does diminish itself. but only through practice, not through understanding. And this is where people get it wrong as well. They think that somehow understanding raises your consciousness levels. No, not really. Only practice. If you can walk through this world vulnerable and open, you've done a great deal of work on yourself because you've removed all your defense systems. And this sets you up for enlightenment.
Emma would like to ask a question.
Hello, Emma.
Hello. It's more curiosity than anything. Where does the perception of separateness come from?
Ah, good question. Where does the perception of separateness come from? It comes from the dream that thinks it's you called I. In other words, it's not real because the I isn't real. You as an I are made up of thoughts. You're not actually real. But because your thoughts are dream, the dream sees itself as separate from everybody else. But if the dream wasn't there, that wouldn't be the perception. The perception would be that we are all one. It is only because we have an ego and we have that dream happening that the sense of separation or duality occurs. Without the ego, there is no duality. We are one.
It feels really reassuring.
Well,
in those difficult times where I'm trying to be open and it's very defended people, or I guess that seeing me being open or loving towards them, and not serving self, but as an extension of myself. I don't know if I'm making much sense.
if you come firmly into the moment, a lot of the ego just disappears because it doesn't. A lot of separation disappears. The sense of right, wrong, good, bad, me, you disappears when we're very present in the moment. But because we bring our dream to the moment, and it gives us that sense of separation, it seems real. You take away the ego and there is no separation. We are one. And if awareness becomes aware of itself, it's obvious we are one. We're all one.
I felt it a few times when I was sick.
It's nice to live it.
Chip away day by day.
Well, basically, if you're preparing the mind for enlightenment, you are taking things away. It's true. You're not adding anything on. There's no added. Nothing needs to be added. We were all programmed to be quite unhappy, actually,
Yeah.
because we're constantly desiring what we haven't got, or we're constantly desiring change, and we're constantly, in a lot of ways, attached to what we do have and fearful of losing it. So. Yeah, we feel unhappy. We feel not content. Not see, my definition of happiness is profound contentment for no reason. Well, the nature of the ego is not to be content, it's to be discontent. And when you really look at discontentment, that's a form of suffering.
I really liked what you said the other day about, being dead and just witnessing. Nothing can be done.
Yeah, if you can step back into that position of being dead and just witnessing and not being able to interfere or control in any way, shape or form, it allows you to see things very clearly. It's just what is. Everything is just what is.
That's what was coming into my head. Or as it should be.
Exactly how it should be. There's no mistakes. Perfection upon perfection upon perfection. And that's hard to understand from a mind that's built on right, wrong, good, bad morality. But in reality, everything is perfect as it is.
Yeah. I guess my biggest my biggest hurdle at the moment is that sort of injustice where it feels like it's almost orchestrated, the separateness. Yeah, but I guess there's no point in looking into that because it doesn't serve the path.
And one of the understandings of it is that sometimes men and women, they have these little bracelets made of silver with little trinkets hanging from them, maybe with a flower, maybe with a castle, maybe with a horse, and they're all made of silver. And we see all these things as separate. You know, we see the horse, we see the house, we see the car, whatever's hanging from this bracelet. We see it as all separate. But the truth is, it's all silver. It's all, and the truth is, everything we see is all beingness. We are one. So from my perspective, I'm talking to myself. So hello, me. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Nice.
Pleasure as always.
Satcha has a question.
Satcha.
Hello, Vishrant. Vishrant, when someone go through spiritual bypass and they are having satori's, but at this point of higher consciousness, can he, convert into enlightenment rather than come back to ego-based reality?
Well, that's a possibility, Satcha, but the problem is if the mind hasn't been prepared for enlightenment, it's likely to contract when things don't go its way, and that contraction could attract awareness back to itself and away from itself. It could attract awareness, back to the ego and away from itself as awareness. And so with enlightenment, awareness is aware of itself. With people who aren't enlightened, awareness is aware of the mind and just the mind and through the senses the world. With someone who's enlightened, awareness is aware of itself and also aware of the mind. But the problem with, especially in the early days of awakening, is if the mind hasn't been programmed to relax, hasn't been programmed to be cool, isn't equanimous, it's likely to contract when things don't go well, and awareness is possibly going to pull away from itself and come back to the mind. And that's what happens. A mind that actually doesn't react, a mind that stays cool even when under fire, will support enlightenment. A mind that is going to contract when someone betrays it, or when someone lies, or someone does something to it, or something goes wrong, that type of mind is not going to support enlightenment, because it's probably going to go into massive contraction and attract awareness away from itself back to the mind itself. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thanks, Vishrant.
So in the early days, the year before awakening, I had thousands of satori's where I'd find myself as pure awareness, and then awareness being pure on itself, and then also awareness on the world, so both on the world and on itself, and then it would leave itself and come back to being totally just on the world and ego, and then back again. It was this flip-flop affair that was occurring because my mind at that stage had not completely surrendered.
Okay, but when seeker go through the bypass and he's having a satori, and when he fall back, um, as per my experience, which is really very painful, and when you have to, practice again to come back into higher consciousness, at that time it goes a bit difficult. So can you just describe on that, please?
Yeah. Yeah, as long as you're buying story, you're lost. You see, if you want to use self-inquiry to find awareness on awareness, you have to use self-inquiry. You can't be entertaining anything else. You can't be thinking about other things. You can't be involved in any kind of conflict. The totality has to be what's aware. What's aware, and turning awareness back to itself. if there's a partiality in that, it won't work. So it's difficult if you're still hanging on to some story somewhere. You actually have to be in a state that is really free in the mind for a self-inquiry to actually work properly, where awareness can go back onto itself. It's up to you to create that environment. But if you get disturbed by the way the world is, it's best to learn to let that go. And the more you can let go, or the more you can be warmly okay with whatever appears, the better. And the easier it is for awareness to stay on awareness. In the early days, in the early years, see, after a while, awareness locks onto itself so tightly. It's like two, permanent magnets locking on. You just can't pull them apart. But that's quite often not the case in the early days of enlightenment. In the early days of enlightenment, it's kind of fragile and it needs to be protected. So in the early days of enlightenment for me, I used to sit still for long periods of time, and I used to hang out with another guy who was awake, and we used to sit together for long periods of time, and we would move through the world doing what we had to do in a lot of ways together for a while. And awareness just got more and more and more locked onto itself to a point where it just wouldn't leave itself, not for anything. But that took a while.
Thanks, Vishrant.
Rebecca asks, how did you work with people in the marketplace who have inflated self-importance and hold positions of power? I currently take a stance of observation and gentle assertiveness, yet I notice some people sucking up to them. I find this frustrating, but I practice let go, which is helpful.
Good question, Rebecca. I find whatever works is worthy. You don't want to get caught by people being pompous. It's okay. You don't want to get caught by people power tripping. It's okay. Just do whatever it takes to make it work and don't get caught in injustice. Because if you get caught in injustice, you're the sucker. It's all okay. Everything's okay. People are okay as they are. You just do whatever it takes to make it work. And the people who are sucking up are probably just trying to make it work as well. Drop your judgment about them too. Be free. Be free. Mature men and mature women make it work. That's what they do. Don't get caught.
Nadine asks, if everything is as it should be, perfect, then why seek at all?
Because we're suffering. To live as an ego is to suffer. The first of the four noble truths, life is dissatisfying, or life is dukkha. It is. And this dukkha or dissatisfaction in the second noble truth is caused by our desires and by our attachments. So true. The Buddha got it right. The third noble truth, there can be an end to this suffering or this dissatisfaction. And the fourth noble truth, there is a pathway, an eightfold path to getting free. And it's all so very true. Or you can just stay in suffering if you want. I don't recommend that. I recommend you go for higher consciousness and enlightenment. I recommend that you get out of it. Why seek it all? Because you want to get free.
Are spiritual traps just attachments and desires that we have not given up?
They can be. They can be. Look and see for yourself. You see, really, anything that I tell you is going to be once again borrowed knowledge and practically worthless. If someone who's awake or someone who, even if they're not awake, if they're saying something that you want to understand, look inside yourself. Look for the answers inside yourself. Look for the proof inside yourself. Don't believe anyone. Don't believe me. Don't ever do that. Look inside yourself. Find your own experience of what's happening, and then it's yours. That's why I advocate meditation and self-inquiry, so people can find out for themselves. There's no point taking a belief from me or anyone else. That's silly. Look for yourself. As far as I can tell, all belief systems are prisons. Find out for yourself. Investigate for yourself. The seeker is an investigator.
Parikshit asks, does observer exist at the time when you see the world as anicca?
Depends on whether awareness is just on itself or whether awareness is on itself and out on the world as well. You see, if awareness is just on itself, there's just vast nothing. When awareness is on itself and on the world, what I find exists is love, and yes, there's an observer that observes the mind. The mind is silent most of the time, but there's still the observer there. Then when awareness comes back onto itself fully, vast nothingness as self. Different. And even the answer to that question doesn't help you. You have to discover that for yourself. You have to look for yourself. No amount of collected knowledge will raise your consciousness levels. Only your own direct seeing, and then it becomes your own direct knowing.
You say that understanding and the collection of knowledge is a trap. Do we need to have any spiritual knowledge to wake up? Or can we wake up just by sitting with an awake teacher?
Spiritual knowledge is great. One bit of spiritual knowledge. Unconditional surrender will set you free. Now, what are you going to do to facilitate that? If your mind knows how to unconditionally surrender, it has learned everything it needs to learn to wake up. It's that simple, but it's very difficult because we are in no way programmed for unconditional surrender. We're programmed to survive. We're programmed to struggle to survive. And so it goes against our primal programming to be able to surrender unconditionally. And because it goes against our primal programming, it's almost impossible because it takes a lot of practice. This is why not many people wake up, and this is why not that many people raise their consciousness levels too high, because it takes a lot of practice to wake up. Someone who has mastered their mind has just failed more than anyone else who hasn't, because they've practiced more. It's up to you. You're the one that's going to create your reality. What you practice is going to be your reality, because you're going to create your default patterns through your practice. You are totally responsible for your consciousness levels, and you are totally responsible for your enlightenment. It's up to you. You want to get out of the prison of the mind, do something about it.
Emma would like to ask a question.
Hello, Emma. Emma, you're muted. You're still muted. So I think we need to go on.
We'll come back to Emma if she manages to unmute herself.
Okay.
Um, do you think that studying psychology can help a seeker to avoid the traps of the mind?
With Emma, it looked like she had unmuted herself, and it looks like she was muted by you. Anyway, what was that one? How can... What was the question? Sorry.
Do you think that studying psychology can help a seeker to avoid the traps of the mind?
It can do, but the problem with studying psychology is that we at school were taught how to be problem solvers, and when we study psychology, we turn that problem solving onto our own mind. And instead of just witnessing the mind with an observer, we tend to get involved in analyzing the mind, and we tend to get involved in procrastination of the mind. And so instead of raising our consciousness levels, we lower them because we get into mind grinding, trying to work out what's happening, instead of just witnessing the mind. And so psychology can help, but it can also hinder. Depends on what a person does with it. Really, if you want to see what's happening in your mind, you need to develop a witness that observes it, that doesn't get involved in judgment and doesn't get involved at that time in fixing it, just witnesses it. And in the witnessing, we get to see what needs to be removed and what needs to stay. If we just get involved in analyzing, we've gone into another dream. We're lost in another dream. We're lost in lower consciousness again. We might think we've gone to higher consciousness because we're working things out, but that problem solving is still a dream in lower consciousness. So that's a little bit of a trap as well.
Can meditation be used to escape feeling wounding? Is this a trap?
The only thing that I've discovered that cannot be used to escape wounding or escape anything else is the practice of openness. And that is why I teach the practice of openness, because it allows us to take down our defense systems, heal our wounded heart, and it also allows us to find love, because in openness, love appears. And so openness, from my perspective, counts for everything. And it is a wonderful spiritual practice that nobody else needs to know that you're actually practicing. So you can use it and do it in the marketplace. So it's up to you. Meditation can definitely be used to escape pain. You take your awareness away from what's hurting you and you put it on the breath. That'll work. Yep, sure. And so that can be used. But you cannot use openness to escape anything. It is brilliant. And it is something we can practice every day, all day long in the marketplace without anyone else know that we're doing a spiritual practice. Up to you. What do you practice?
Barik Shed asks another question. The cause of suffering is tanha. Why is there tanha or cravings in us?
So what you're asking about is the nature of the mind, really. It's just the nature of the mind to get caught in desires, to get caught in cravings. It's just, and any time we're caught in anything like that, we're offering resistance to something. And in that resistance, we suffer. There's no real way out of that except higher consciousness, because it's the nature of the mind to be so. And what's more, it's promoted by the world we live in, by advertising, trying to make us discontent so we'll buy things. It's the way it is. And you just have to accept that's the way it is. But as your consciousness levels rise, you don't get caught in certain things because you can see clearly they just cause suffering in you. Anytime we addictively demand that we have anything, we are creating massive suffering in ourselves. So the practice of letting go. the practice of acceptance. These practices are like an antidote to the suffering, but they have to be practiced. As long as all we practice is longing for what we want, we are going to suffer. Make it okay to have enough now, and then you're also wealthy. Because no matter how much you've got, as long as you think you want more, you're not wealthy. You're poor.
How can I get over the identification with the body and mind?
You can't. Not unless you wake up to your true nature and live as beingness, which is living as presence. Then it's really obvious you're not the mind and body. But even if you have satoris and you experience yourself as beingness and you hold that in memory, you're still going to be identified as an ego if you come back to ego-based reality. The only way to lose the ego is to wake up and then live as beingness or living as presence. It's just not possible that you can be an ego. Just not possible. It's so obvious that it's just an aspect of the mind. That is not you, because you are presence. But on the way to waking up, you can move into service, the way of the heart, and you will diminish the I. Because service does, it diminishes the I. Because it's not about you anymore, it's about others. And that's very beautiful. But that's up to you. You really want to diminish the I? Wake up.
It has been said that a monk may become enlightened in a monastery, but then may lose that enlightenment when tempted by Maya in the marketplace, like with sexuality or power. How can someone overcome these desires?
Well, I don't teach people who live in monasteries or ashrams. I teach people who live in the marketplace, who have families, who have jobs, and have to pay the bills. And so in the marketplace, we have the opportunity constantly to surrender, constantly practice acceptance of what is, because we are tempted by sexuality, by power, by all this other thing that's in dream or maya, as you want to call it. It gives us this opportunity to let go if we want. And those opportunities aren't as good in a monastery because they're just not there. And so someone who wakes up in a monastery, in a way, could have a fragile awakening because they haven't dealt with the surrender of sexuality properly. They haven't dealt with the surrender of money properly. They haven't dealt with the surrender of power properly because they haven't had the opportunity to. In the marketplace, we have the opportunity to constantly surrender those things because they're always there. And so an awakening in the marketplace that is stable is probably a lot stronger than any awakening in any monastery or ashram. But that's a result of practice, not as a result of anything else. Practice is what brings us home. The practice of surrender, the practice of let go, the practice of acceptance. And only you can do that. Nobody can do it for you.
The next question is, from what I can see, my main trap would be wanting a career or putting other things before truth. As a seeker, how did you not deviate from your goal of awakening?
So, I think it was 1986 or 85, sometime around then, I had a falling out with some of the administrators at the Rajneesh organisation, and I gave my mala back and said, I'm out of here. And I managed to stay away for about 3 or 4 months, I guess. And I got into partying, and I partied a lot because I had lots of friends and I had a bit of money. And one of my friends, a beautiful man called John Cooper, who I quite often spent time with down in Claremont, he was a very funny man. He used to make me laugh so much. And we'd spend time together and we'd have a few ciders together or whatever. And one day I came in to look for him at a coffee shop, And I asked, where has John been in? And they said, no. I said, oh. They said, he's died. And I said, what? Because he's died? He is such an up guy. Yes, he committed suicide. And it broke my heart because I loved him. He was a nice guy. And we had a lot of fun together. And I realized that we're all going to die. We're all impermanent. And here I was wasting my life on partying and avoiding truth because I'd had a falling out with some people involved in administration of the Rajneesh organisation, and it wasn't worth it. And so I decided to go back and take sannyas again. And I was engaged to be married at that time, and my partner said, if you go and take sannyas again, because she wasn't a sannyasin, I will leave you. And she did, because I went and took sannyas again. Because I realized through the understanding of impermanence that we need to wake up in this lifetime. And there is nothing more important than higher consciousness and enlightenment in this lifetime. Everything else is a sham. And so I lost my fiance, and within 2 years of that, I'd actually given my businesses away because I noticed they were in the way of my heart. And I walked around Australia for 4 years as a bum looking for my heart and looking for higher consciousness, because I realized it was the only thing that was worth doing here, that everything else was a sham. And that at the age of 33, I had wasted 33 years of my life in pursuit of wealth and pursuit of the wrong things. And so I'm 66 years old now in the body, and I realize I've only really lived for 33 years because that's when I started finding beingness and heart. Before that, I see it as a loss because it was in the dark. So my life became very centered around truth, very focused around higher consciousness, around heart, around enlightenment, because of the recognition that it is the only thing that's worth doing here. Everything else is just repetitive, over and over again, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime.
You teach celebration of life. Do you think that renunciation is a trap or an obstacle to enlightenment?
I do teach celebration of life because my Osho teacher, Rajneesh, he said, celebrate life, squeeze the juice out of life, and I agree totally. There is something to renounce though. It's this. You don't need to renounce anything else. You can have everything. You just need to renounce the mind. You put truth first. You put heart first. Always. And that works. I don't think we need to renounce anything else. We don't need to renounce sexuality. We don't need to renounce material goods. We don't need to renounce anything. Just this. Just the mind. Surrender, surrender, surrender. Let go, let go, let go, and let God. This is the way. There is no other way that works. It's the beauty way. Find a way to open up so much that you have love in your life and you become an oasis of that for the benefit of others. This is the beauty way to higher consciousness, to super consciousness. This is the best way. Thank you for satsang. It's good to see brave hearts here today.